Task management is a workflow that works incredibly well in Logseq. Its implementation is arguably better than all other tools in the space and is a great substitute for Notion users. It's exceptionally quick to create to-dos, manage tasks, and not to mention the utility of having a single app to manage it all from your notes to your tasks. So in this video, I'll be walking you through the basics of task management in Logseq and help you get started, as well as introduce you to a few more advanced concepts. This video has chapters, so feel free to skip around. Before you get started, it is important to understand whether or not Logseq makes sense for you and your specific needs. For me, Logseq is perhaps the perfect app for me, but this may not be the case for everyone. For instance, if you spend a large amount of time every day inside of Logseq, it makes much more sense to use the app for task management compared to someone who only opens the app like a couple times a week. At the moment, this is the case, but once the mobile apps are released, this could change and we could see Logseq being more utilized for pure task management without the side of knowledge management. But at the moment, Logseq's power really can only be utilized if it's open for substantial amounts of times. Also realize that the decision of whether to use Logseq for task management is largely personal and it's worth experimenting to see if it works for you. Understand that in order for Logseq to successfully function as a task manager, it's often very helpful if a large amount of the work you do is inside of Logseq. The purpose of your Logseq database is also important. If your database primarily serves as a PKM tool with book summaries, etc., to-dos in Logseq may not really be the perfect choice due to the potential of cluttering up your database and the lack of very much real benefit from it, especially when doing tasks outside of your day-to-day work. On the other hand, someone who uses Logseq for things like meeting notes, which are not necessarily permanent and as somewhat of a life OS, is likely to derive greater benefit from using Logseq as a tool for task management. So in this page, you can see for most of the keywords that are available. So you can have a done task, you can have a to-do task, a task that is marked doing, a task that's marked now, task that's marked later, task that's marked cancelled, and task that's marked waiting. Each of these can serve a different purpose and have their own nuances to it. So I'll start with the first. Done is quite self-explanatory. Any task that's been checked off will be marked done. And one interesting thing about tasks when they're marked done, if they were previously marked doing or now, for as long as they've been marked doing and now, clicking the marking a task as done that was already marked as doing actually keeps track of how long they've been under doing. So as you can see here, I've actually had this page here for 85 hours. Of course, you probably won't be having that, but what's more realistic is probably going to be do this, now do this, wait maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, and then mark it as done right here. So now next stage would be to do. It's just a task that's marked that you're going to do. I usually use to do tasks for something that's more imminent than something that's then later. Later is used for tasks that I don't plan on doing right now but are still fairly important. Cancelled is just whenever I actually cancel a task. Waiting, I mark a task as waiting whenever it's kind of stalled or I don't really have the means to do this at the moment, but it's still important to keep that open for the future. Now, one interesting thing about Logseq is that this is not all that you're limited to. You can also add priorities to the task. So down here, right over here, you can add priorities to the task. You can add them to, let's say, right here. These priorities have to be added at the beginning of the line. So right over here, you can mark priorities. Now, these don't really have very much a function on its own, but it's coupled with custom queries that you can make full use of these queries and these delineations and actually differentiate between them. So for instance, You can often use queries for querying all the tasks that need to be done now, which is actually inbuilt into Logseq. The opportunities are really endless. You can make custom queries and query in basically any way that you want. Danzo from the Discord made this great chart demonstrating all of the functions, so shout out to him. By default, hitting Command Enter cycles between later, now, and done. But you can change this to use to do, doing, and done by going into settings, going to the editor, and changing the preferred workflow to do/doing. Now hitting Command Enter returns these. Now with that out of the way, let's start using Logseq to create to-dos and manage your tasks. So there are three primary components to any to-do list system: input, surfacing what's relevant, and then the actual action of checking things off. Let's start with the first one, input. The power of Logseq and to-dos in it is really that you can create them anywhere. In any page in your entire database, just click Command Enter, and then just enter the task that you're working on. Research on cats. There, done. And maybe open another random page. Command Enter, research on dogs. Another random page. Command Enter, research on cat food. Simple as that. Creating to-dos in Logseq is incredibly quick, and this is probably one of the main reasons anyone would use Logseq for task management. For a lot of the tasks, I prefer to create them inside the tasks that they're related to in order to give them context. So for instance, let's say I was going to create a task to take notes on the Doppler effect. So I'd go on to refraction, my notes for refraction, which happens to be over here. And then over here, I'll just, anywhere here, perhaps wherever I want to start writing the notes, I perhaps write them here, Doppler effect. And underneath that tab, I'll just write Command Enter, take notes on the Doppler effect. This allows me to give context for this to-do list, which happens to be very useful in the next stage of the to-do list process, which I'll show you in just a bit, and can reduce the entire friction of getting started with it. Because normally whenever I come up with this, I'd usually be, let's say, at the end of class, and then my teacher tells me, all right, for homework you have to research on the Doppler effect. So I'll already be right around here taking notes in class, and then next thing I know, teacher gives us this topic, and then underneath that I'll just hit Command Enter and write this. Now, there's a lot more to it, and we'll get back to this example in just a bit. This method would be more useful when the task is directly relevant to the notes you're taking. It doesn't always, however, make sense for general tasks. Additionally, they can also be a lot more frictionful in that it can take a while to navigate to the notes and then decide where to keep the to-do. And this is where the daily note comes in handy. So the other primary input method is via the daily note. In order to manage your tasks via this method, follow the principle of whenever during the day you've come up with a task, and this can be pretty much anything. It doesn't have to be related to notes or something that you've talked about in your database. All you've got to do is create a block on your daily note page and just hit Command Enter and make it a to-do. And this is one of the most useful ways to use Logseq for to-do management, and just makes it so quick and effortless. So I can quickly make a task to talk to Rob about the sales pitch, or perhaps buying noodles. Now the second example may not be the most applicable to a lot of people, but it's still an example of something that could be used in Logseq. Now these may not necessarily have a lot to do with your database, and as a result, it's a better idea to take them on your daily note and have them resurface on its own, because these don't necessarily need the context of notes surrounding them. Now, the second stage of process of performing task management using the daily note, and this is arguably the biggest benefit of using Logseq for task management, and this is the ability to link. In some cases, of course, this will be more practical than others. So if you have a task in Logseq, talk about, say, buy groceries, this is unlikely to be very practical for linking because it doesn't have anything to do with the actual contents of your database. But if at the same time, if the task is inside of Logseq, like say taking notes or studying for an assessment, or perhaps even talking about a project or discussing a project with Rob or something. So let's say talk to Rob about my, and here's where it gets interesting. So I can say talk to Rob about the prototype for the app. So let's say talk to Rob about my flowcharts and pseudocodes for my app project. Great. So now what this unlocks is really the ability to first reduce the friction. So as soon as this appears in my resurfacing stage of the process, which we'll get into, as soon as this appears in that stage, I can easily just click it and understand where I can work. And this is arguably one of the biggest benefits of using Logseq. It's the ability to link directly to the tasks. So right over here, I'll also show you that it also appears in the link references. And this can help you in that it can tell you like the days that you've been working at things. It can help you record time and can tell you like how you divided your time and or separated the various stages of your project. So let's just mark this done. And right over here, for instance, this is actually one of the project management pages. I'll likely talk about this later in the video in another chapter. Right over here, you can see the various stages to using flowcharts and pseudocodes over the overarching plan. So this is just a sub part of that thing, but over here you can see the stages that are required and how I and when I did all of these, if I were to, let's say, actually use scheduled. Further, when I am doing the task, I can get context about it in like literally one click. It's easy for me to get the context of the task, and this can help you actually perform the task better, more efficiently. Now, the daily note is one of the best entry points to creating tasks and inputting information into Logseq and can be used for variety of purposes. Everything you do here will also appear on the linked references of the pages you link to, and the opportunities of using this are endless, really. I'll be making a specific video soon on the daily note and more workflows regarding it, so stay tuned for that. Scheduling tools, and this is what really preps you for the stage of surfacing the tasks. This is one aspect where Logseq overtakes a lot of other PKM tools in task management. So Logseq actually has a wide variety of built-in scheduling features. In the previous page, you might have seen right over here that I have this thing called scheduled. What this means is I've scheduled this task for this specific date so that this task will surface in my daily note on that date. So for instance, let's say these two things over here are custom queries, which we'll get into in a bit. So let's say going back to that Doppler effect. Yeah, right over here. So what I'll do is add a schedule to this. Let's say scheduled, and I can, using the date picker, I can pick a date that I want to do this. So let's say I want to do it today on the Thursday, just for example's sake. And you can add things like repeaters so that they actually recur. And this is one pain point that many people have had about Notion, and Logseq actually solves this using this way. You can add time, so let's say, I don't know, 5 o'clock. 17, so that'll be 17 o'clock. And then repeater, I can choose if I want. I don't want a repeater because it's a one-time task, but let's just submit this now. So now, as you can see here, there's a scheduled. You see the schedule here, and what's actually unique about this, and this is where it really ties into the resurfacing is that when I go home, when I go to the task page, at the bottom, here's what I can see. Underneath a new label titled Schedule and Deadline, I can see all the tasks that I'm scheduled to do for today. Now, this is perhaps the basics of Logseq, and you can use this for a lot of stuff. So this is not just limited to tasks. You can also use schedule and deadline for, let's say, sticky notes, or so all you have to do is, let's say, work on uh, what is the password for the internet? I like apples. And let's say you want to recall this every day. Scheduled it and repeater every day. Great. So now every day this will appear at the bottom of your schedule and deadline and serve as a reminder that the password for the internet is I like apples. Now this is just one example, but the usages of this can expand past of what you usually use sticky notes for, and this can really take over that. But that's kind of diverging from the task management, so let's finally start with the next stage, which is resurfacing. The next stage is always the question of surfacing what's relevant, and this is an area where every to-do app worth its salt has attempted to push its own method. Some of them are less user customizable, like Things 3, and primarily operates on dates, while there are other apps like OmniFocus, which uses custom lists that the user can program to specific use cases and are really complicated in the workflows that can achieve. Now, Logseq has both. With the previously mentioned scheduling tools, you can have tasks which resurface past highlights, like this Doppler effect over here. But the real power lies in custom queries. Now you may have noticed these two things over here. What these two are two custom default queries that you can automatically configure in Logseq. What this does is allows you to pick specific tasks which you can filter in whatever way you want and have these appear every day on your daily note using that filter. So I have one over here for overdue tasks, which basically shows me all the tasks that I had scheduled to do sometime back but haven't actually completed. Like this study schedule, which I keep procrastinating, which I should probably start doing, which I'll just change the schedule date to for today. Great. Now this will appear over here as well. Now also you can see, and the next one is now, and this is actually there by default. So what this does is that it resurfaces all the tasks that you've marked as doing, as in you're currently doing it. So currently I'm polishing the app for the personal project and I'm reading this textbook. And this will just appear in now as a reminder of what you're doing right now and like the overarching things that you should be focusing on. There's a lot more that you can do with these default queries. So some people like to have a backlog which just surfaces all of their to-dos across the entire thing that are not marked for, that are not scheduled at all. That could be a backlog. What I recommend doing first is primarily using the scheduling tools to manage your tasks and use these default queries to have them appear just whenever you need. And for when you're looking at tasks to do about a specific thing, I recommend going to the page and just finding the tasks that are linked to it. That's the main gist of surfacing to-dos, but one definite thing that I'd recommend doing is going into your config.edn file, which you can find in your Logseq database folder. So mine's actually called AthensDB. So if I open it here, you can see all I have to do is first go to my Logseq folder, and over here there's a config.edn file, so just open that, and here you are. So the first setting I'd recommend you changing is going to this default queries place and adding something called overdue right over here. I recommend adding this so that you can make the to-dos just easier to understand. And well, yeah, that's pretty much it. I also recommend doing a next query, which should already be inbuilt. And yeah, so this and this are already inbuilt, but this overdue is probably the only thing that you should add. This is an example of the next query in action. Query. You can see this appears under the next query. But that's not how most people's config.edn files look like. So I brought up a blank template on the side here. Now, in order to add a custom query to this, first go to the default queries property icon, which you can find somewhere near the middle around the 100th line, and just notice that towards the end where you can see this next query, you simply go back 2 spaces so that you keep these 2 brackets. These are important to have so that the function remains closed with these 2 braces over here. And in this middle is where the query will go. Now, usually when you find a query online, you'll encounter it in this form. You'll see begin query and end query. Now, when you're trying to add a query like this, you have to first make sure that you exclude these outer parts, so you just use the contents of it. Make sure it starts with a curly brace and ends in 1. Simply copy it and paste it. Now just refresh your database and you should have the changes appear. If it doesn't, then I'd recommend reindexing. These will now appear in your daily note. I recommend joining the Discord and specifically the data log channel, where you can get inspiration for queries that can be very helpful for your workflows. While managing projects in Logseq, the method that works the best for most people is creating an individual page for each of the projects. So let's say I've got a big prototype due in a week. So I can either create a page titled, say, prototype, add some quick tags to it. Let's say programming, hashtag obesity, or maybe, and then maybe add a project tag as well, saying that it's a project. Great. The alternate way, of course, is to use namespaces. And this is actually the one that I'm most familiar with and is actually the one that I prefer personally. So here's how it goes. So I'll actually give you an example of how I use it. So let's say I open over here, personal project criterion B. Right. Over here, as you can see, I've got one big sort of unit or subject that I usually go through in a year, and it's called personal project. In this, there's actually a sub-project called criterion B, which is actually the creation of a product. So I've used namespaces to make criterion B sort of a sub-page of personal project. So as you can see over here at the bottom in the hierarchy, it inherits from this. Inside of these pages, usually it makes sense to put to-dos in sort of like a hierarchical order. And in this case, I've actually used an outline. This over here is actually a plugin called the To-Do Master plugin by Pang. I'll actually link this in the description. So what this does is just basically adds progress bars based on the subtasks and the primary task over here. So as you can see, mostly it's all 100%, but over here I've missed out on a few to-dos here and there. So we'll have to-do master fat or children's locks. If you can see 75% here because 3 of these are done, but that's how it basically functions, the plugin. What I've done over here is also added schedules so that these appear in my daily note on these days. This is when I want to work on them, and this reminds me on those days by appearing in my daily note. In the future, Logseq will probably have notifications support, so it'll actually remind you even when it's outside the app, which is going to be hugely useful for task management, although this is not yet available. Another actual useful way is also just to create a page called projects and have everything as a namespace underneath that. So let's say prototype. I can create a projects page and a page underneath that called prototype. Now this is another approach that some people take. It's also fairly useful, and this allows for the notes for the projects to all be centralized in one place. This is an easy way to tell that something is a project at a glance, and this just visually, I guess, makes sense. Although functionally, there isn't really much difference, and this can actually be worse in some ways because it does not give you the immediate context that a hierarchy gives you of the actual overarching project this inherits from personal project right over here. That's it from the video. I hope this video wasn't too dry and I was able to convey useful information in a somewhat engaging manner. I would appreciate any feedback and would love a subscribe if you'd like to keep up with future content created by me. Thanks.